Well, hello all. Today we're going to make a simple audio amplifier, and it's going to have only, well, 3 components at the most, you could say. Just have a look at this diagram. It's going to have a capacitor, a speaker, and a jack, an audio jack that has 2 wires. And that's it. So as long as we've got that capacitor, speaker, and audio jack, and then obviously this LM386 audio amp chip. So I guess that would be 1, 2, 3 components, or maybe 4. And then if you consider the breadboard, 5. But you could just solder these to the pins if necessary. And the notch of the LM chip is here at the top. So let's show you how we put that together. So we are about to make our audio amplifier using an LM chip. So we take the chip, we see that the little notch is at the top there, and we're going to put it across, bridging the gap. So there's the little notch. Now let's put our battery box in last. We need to put a capacitor in, and the capacitor's got a negative side and a positive side. The positive's got the longer leg, and we're going to put that to number 5 pin and poke it in somewhere like over there. Then we're going to take our speaker. Here's our speaker, and let's put 1 wire in there, coming from the other side, the negative side of the capacitor, and that goes to number 4 pin, which is over on this side. So that goes into pin number 4 there. Then from number 4, this goes to ground, and ground is 2. So we're going to take a little wire from number 4 to number 2. That's grounded it, so we've completed that part of the circuit. Then here are the wires from the jack. 1 wire goes to number 2, and 1 wire goes to number 3. So there's those 2 are now plugged in. The last thing we need to do is to put our battery box. Number 2 is where the negative wire goes to, and number 6 is where the positive wire or connector goes to. So there's number 6. So the pins are numbered 1, 2, 3, 4 on the left, then 5, 6, 7, 8. So all we have to do is push our battery in to get it going. Let's get the radio going.
Excellent morning. You're back on top of the pops. Excuse me. Yes, I'm suddenly back on.
So there's our radio going. Let's put it in, and then
Information, of course, from inside the box.
so
Springbok Centre, Lukanya, Am and Flanker. Marco van Staden met the press earlier today. They shot down any suggestions, and Coach Rassi did the same, that the 10 changes to the Springbok team to take on the Wallabies in Perth this coming Saturday was disruptive.
so there's our amplifier working.
33-7 win in Brisbane last weekend.
Really amazing work you're doing with Euclid, the space telescope. This is the European Space Agency, and
So we've turned the volume down, and it's pretty clear.
So much.
So maybe some of you are slightly tempted to take up electronics, or maybe just try it. I remember where my interest in electronics came from. My dad used to fix radios in World War II, in World War II planes. And he came home, and he wasn't really interested in electronics after that, but he did teach me how to build my first crystal set. And I climbed a pine tree, strung an aerial down to my room, had this cat's whisker and this capacitor condenser, and I could hear free broadcasting over this crystal set that we made. And that stirred my interest. And then a second time I was in my youth interested in electronics was a friend had a kit where you just plugged things together at little springs and you stuck things in, and you stuck the components into the springs. You had a diagram under the springs and it just directed you of how to put the components together. So you've got to be exposed to something before you stand a chance of being interested in it. And if you're interested in it, you might even get an opportunity or make the opportunity to do it. So I want to really punt the idea of exposure as even a solution to a country like South Africa's problems, where our official unemployment rate is 33%. That's a third of the working population. But there's so many people who want to be employed who've given up. And I'm just thinking how many people, especially disadvantaged people, poor people, don't ever get exposure to so many things like even electronics. So if they've never been exposed, like I was lucky and privileged enough to be exposed to making a crystal set and seeing a little electronic set that you could put together. And then in my adult youth, adulthood, when I had the money, I could then go and, especially when the internet arrived, you could look up circuits. Previously, you had to go to a library, get a book on electronics and try and build those circuits. So, but it's always been possible to make them, just much easier now. And then because I had built a slight interest in my youth, I now turned electronics into a hobby. So I would say in a country, if you could arrange programs that just expose people like we do at school to javelin, discus, high jump, long jump, running, soccer, football, whatever, and you know how much that contributes towards people who win Olympics medals. It's because they've been exposed to it. If you've never had a swimming pool and you've never been exposed to it, how can you become a swimmer? So if you've never been exposed to a sailing boat, how could you ever learn that you either hate or love sailing? So I'd say if a country wants to create jobs and opportunities, I would say it'd be greatly in their interest to have like electronic academies, places where youths can go and just be exposed. Go and sit there and just watch people do a bit of robotics or play with electronic components, put them together, and then they might say, wow, I might be interested. Or they might just go away and say, wow, it's the most dreadfully boring thing I've ever seen. But at least some people who are exposed to it the bug will bite and they will want to do it and if they have the opportunity, they will do it. So I would say for a country like South Africa to solve its unemployment problem, create centers where people can learn every single kind of skill, even if it's not money making. Even if, say you started an electronic center, maybe you could be making something like little audio amps like I've just shown here, and then you rope a few of the people in. You say, okay, you stick the components in, or you teach them soldering in America, and you just solder the pieces together and you package it, maybe in some neater little form. And so the people maybe make themselves a little audio amp that goes with their cell phone and they can listen to it, and they tell their friends about it and get them involved, get them plugging a few components together, and they begin to see, just with 3 or 4 components, we can make a little audio amp. And audio amps are always of value to everyone. Maybe they can even sell it in the township or in wherever among their friends. And maybe that's the way a business starts. So exposure. I remember my interest in Christianity started with my Opa. He was like a Dutchman. He could barely speak English, but in my very young, earliest he used to stay with our family. He dragged me into his room and we would pray together. And there's never been a time I never knew God. Exposure. It was my grandpa who exposed me to God. And then we were sent to Sunday school, and that's where I learned about Christianity. And that's where my interest picked up. if my parents, who never went to church, hadn't insisted we go to Sunday school, the interest would have never grown. So even though my parents might not have been interested in these things, they exposed us to it, and sometimes the exposure takes hold, sometimes it doesn't. But exposure. I think it's such an important way to solve so many problems.